We're going to talk about an article here by Kevin Casey. It was published in 2019, and it goes over 5 common fears of artificial intelligence and some solutions to them and his opinions on them. First, the possibility of bias. Bias is when an opinion or an outcome is influenced by some outside opinion or outcome. For example, if I were to say Basically Science podcast is the best science or education podcast out there, which I can tell you it's not. However, that would be very biased of me to say because I have a personal opinion that would influence the outcome of my statement. Right? So people are afraid that this bias can present itself in these deep learning networks and these machine learning networks. And it's a completely reasonable fear because it's a lot harder to unlearn something than it is to learn something, right? We all know that breaking habits as people is really hard to do. In order to break a habit in a machine, someone would have to go back through all of the code that it writes itself and find the bias and remove it, which is a task that seems so tedious and so difficult to complete that I don't know that it could be done. With that being said, we shouldn't be afraid, rather we should be weary. What I mean by that is we need to understand that bias in machine learning would be a direct result of our own personal bias. Like the creator of the machine, that bias or the machine that it's learning from or the data that it's learning from, if that data is biased or if that person creating it is biased, then there's likely going to be bias in the machine. I have confidence in programmers and I have confidence in science and scientists. Although it happens, it's our responsibility as scientists and technologists to understand that everything that we work on and everything that we stand for and are passionate about is much bigger than us. It's beyond us. And for us to let our personal bias influence that would be a discredit to the work that we do. So, although you can identify bias in research, in publications, especially in the science community, it's important to know that we try to prevent that bias, and we need to be aware of it. So in that article, Casey says we should be embracing the fear of that bias, and it's important to remember that if we turn a blind eye to the bias, no one is watching to make sure things are getting done right. The second common fear of artificial intelligence, the fear that we're no longer going to need humans. And this is one fear that I think is probably one of the most prominent fears from someone who is new to understanding artificial intelligence. The first thing that you think of when you learn that there's these machines out there or these programs out there that can mimic human behavior, you get concerned if we're going to create something that is going to be better than us and that can take us over. And it's important to remember we need to focus on the real world problems. And to think that humans are no longer going to be needed, it's a reasonable fear, but it's important to remember what we just talked about, that if we're turning a blind eye, no one's watching to make sure things are getting done right. So that's kind of an argument for the fact that we're always going to need human oversight with these technologies. And although it may be possible that we're going to create a technology that will replace humans, it is possible. It's many, many, many decades away. And it shouldn't be something that we're afraid of right now. Instead, we should be focusing on the real world problems. The third fear is just simply the fear of the unknown. I feel like this is also a very common one. Artificial intelligence is something that is so niche and so cutting edge that not many people know about it. And the fact that you don't know about it is what makes it scary. How many times have you, heard of a medical disease or a medical problem and you have no idea what it is and it freaks you out because you don't know if it can kill you? Artificial intelligence is kind of the same idea. As a general population, we don't know enough about it to be able to think critically about it and identify it in our everyday lives, despite the fact that it's already here. Casey goes on to explain that the most accurate artificial intelligence networks, the most accurate ones, are often the most difficult to explain. So when it comes up with an outcome that is so accurate and so unlikely to produce, we can't explain it, and that lack of being able to explain it kind of contributes to that unknown and that fear. And he refers to this as the black box of artificial intelligence. And that black box refers to the fact that a lot of us don't know how a machine came to the conclusion that it came to. To expand upon that point, that's kind of the reason of this podcast. And that's why I'm here. And that's why I am producing this content. Because I want to increase the knowledge of these topics in the general population. And I want to talk about it in a way that is presented in a safe way. Like, I don't expect people to know this information. So, I want to bring science down from this elitist pedestal that it sits on and bring it to the people and show them the raw science and hope that, some individuals learn from what I'm saying and develop an understanding of science in a way that they hadn't previously. And to be honest, I'd be lying if I didn't say that, I need this myself. Artificial intelligence is not what my degree is in. My degree is far from that. And although I went to a very tech-heavy school, this is still a concept that I learned a lot about researching for this episode. I'm okay with pushing myself outside of my comfort zone to learn these topics in science to the best of my ability so that I can present them to you, the listener, or the viewer in a way that it makes sense. Alright, that's enough about me. Well, let's move on to the fourth fear. The fear is the loss of privacy of our data and of ourselves by these networks coming in and trying to learn, or these technologies coming in and trying to learn from us and the way we talk in our conversations. I've heard stories of smart TVs or Alexa Dots, listening to people's conversation, and they had a conversation about some cool product that they were looking at, and all of a sudden now they're seeing ads for that product because the artificial intelligence technology in their home, their home smart devices, heard that conversation and were able to produce ads for the product based on their conversation. This is a real fear. Like, this is something that I myself am uncomfortable with, and I don't have any smart devices in my home with the exception of my phone, my computer, stuff like that. But I don't have Alexa. I don't have I have a smart TV, but it's not a AI smart TV, let's put it that way. So, again, it's important to remember that understanding this fear and embracing this fear is what allows us to take the steps that are necessary to prevent this from happening, right? Understanding and talking about the elephant in the room is how we address it. The fifth and final fear is the fear that someone might lose their job to artificial intelligence. I know that this is a largely talked about topic, and this has been talked about since I was in high school, and so for the past 5 to 6 years of my life, people have been talking about the fact that they're afraid they're going to lose their job to some robot or to some computer. And to be honest, it's been agreed upon that AI will have a large impact on a large range of jobs. That impact will likely result in loss of jobs. It's true. And experts have agreed upon the fact that people might lose their jobs because of AI. However, Casey goes on to mention that in the PC era, people were very afraid that these computers, when, personal computers, as they started to be produced, were going to replace jobs, and they did. But as a result of this new technology, it created millions more jobs for other people to fill. So they go on to mention that historically, new technology does not automate jobs, rather, it makes more jobs possible.